All right, there we go. All right, so this is the October 25th, 2023 Crossplane SIG for Developer Experience meeting. And I will drop a link in the chat here to everybody, in the Zoom chat that is, to have direct access to the agenda doc. Not a ton of things that we need to be thinking about besides 1.14, if we're being honest with ourselves. So let's dive on into that and get caught up. Philippe, as of yesterday, actually, let me change screens real quick. Let me stop this share and then use a different profile. Sorry about that. Should be there. All right, let me start the share again. I think it's this one. There we go. All right. And my dog's here now too. Great start to the SIG meeting here. So Philippe, yesterday I had got everything up to date in the tracking epic for 1.14. But do you want to catch me up on anything that may have been going on during your European working hours today while I'm catching up slowly on Pacific time?
I think the only thing was that we just merged the last minute PR switching the ready and sync the columns in the default output for the trace subcommand. Nothing, just aesthetic. It was just to make it the same ordering as kubectl get any managed resource, so it wasn't confusing the order of the columns. So it's already merged and working, so nothing to add there. And that's it, I think. Nothing else today.
Cool. So most all of the implementations and investments for 1.14, we had gotten those in before today, basically, right?
Yep.
Have you already synced with Hassan today about the timing for starting the code freeze, lockdown, creating the release branch, all that stuff? Is that soon, very, very soon?
We were talking about doing that today. It's only holding back a little bit on the decision to be taken on schema-aware validation and the discussions we were having around that. I don't know if you follow that topic, but other than that, there is nothing else holding it back. So probably either later today or tomorrow morning European time zone. It will be at least created the release branch for Crossplane. He already started creating the release branch for Crossplane runtime, so the process is already ongoing. We are holding back on the Crossplane side a little bit while waiting for some discussion.
Okay, got it. Is any of that discussion for I think it was like warnings or strict mode, I think it was for validation. Is any of that relevant to this group right here, or that's in that conversation for that is in another channel, another group? We don't need to worry about that here.
Yeah, I don't think it's relevant for. I mean, it's developer experience, so maybe it could be because it's actually a help for developers doing normal compositions, patch and transforms based compositions. So that could actually be interesting to the group. So maybe we can gather some feedback here.
Okay, yeah, let me put that then as a placeholder agenda item for later on, and then we can get into that if we want to. Yeah, okay. All right. So let's look then at everything in the epic here. So I think that we basically had everything in except like for things that were supposed to be done before code freeze, except for this one item in the checklist here, which was not really investigated much into, or didn't put too much of a concern around it. So I think this is kind of reasonable to punt to 1.15. It's not something I would like. Hold on, code freeze can't happen until we get this bug in. It's not that important to me. So Did anybody, because I think this is also something that was experienced a couple of weeks ago. There's been a lot of churn and iteration within the tooling since then. So is this a scenario that anybody's tried since then?
I think it still applies. I don't think we changed anything in that code path, let's say. It's not super straightforward to address that. Handling empty YAML files is always a little bit tricky. What's empty, what's commented, etc., etc. So
Yeah, did we do like a hot fix or like some sort of fix for that upstream with the
that
package
was for
manager?
the that was for the build. Yeah, this one is kind of one more corner case, which maybe we could be handling, if I recall correctly. 30%.
All right. So I'd say like we're at a point here where this is not something that we would hold the code freeze or the 1.14 release for. So I think going ahead and punting this to 1.15 is totally reasonable to me then. All right. And then that's everything in the tracking epic here. We'll move that to 1.15 besides docs, which we have the next week until we do the release. And Pete will talk specifically about docs in just a second too. So that's everything that's in the tracking epic. Two questions then. One, did folks find this format of the epic to be useful in terms of organization and like knowing what we had to accomplish and stuff like that? Was that useful, or any feedback on better ways of tracking our work for the next milestone that we get started on next week? All right. If there's no feedback, we'll continue doing it and continue working in this manner until I hear otherwise. All right. And then the other question was there are no outstanding PRs either, right? That are waiting to get merged in that's relevant to this team either, right? We already kind of mentioned that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, nothing. At that I know
All
of.
right. Sweet. So we look to be in good shape for 1.14 then. Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead then and talk about docs then. Pete, your effort so far has been greatly appreciated, but I also was not super aware of like like what you had started undertaking. I was kind of like, okay, this team is gonna have to worry about docs, and we're gonna come in hot. We're gonna do that last minute. Oh goodness gracious! And then you've already been working on docs, which is super appreciated. And I don't know, like, I think I like to put the burden of docs on, the engineers building the features. So I don't want to like put this on your plate every time. I don't want it to necessarily be a habit, Pete. But super grateful for you taking it on. So do you want to kind of catch us up with like what's already ongoing for docs and what needs to be done and all that stuff?
Yeah, and just to restate something we've talked about with some of the contributing meetings and some of the community meetings. I think that docs works in partnership with engineering, right? Eng isn't going to write all the docs, and docs isn't going to write all the docs. And let's find a split, and I don't think there needs to be like clear demarcations of who owns what, and just work on it collaboratively. I think this release, for example, Nick did a bunch of work to update the function stuff, which is great because I haven't looked at functions, so I can't really write it. And I'm taking on the CLI stuff. And so to expand on that, I think the two big things that we're bringing into of relevance to this group, one is CLI documentation, right? So install what it is, and also command reference. So I'm just about finished. So I don't have I have a local render that you can see, but we don't have any deployment previews that are shareable yet. But that's almost done. Full command reference there. We'll keep that alive. as we make changes. I think one of the big things we'll have to think about is what's that going to look like in the future? Because I assume at some point Crossplane CLI will pull out of Crossplane core from a versioning standpoint. And what does that mean and how do we handle it? I don't know yet. The other thing that we're doing is bringing release notes in. Most likely it'll just be a duplication of what's in GitHub. That hasn't been totally finalized yet, but we have the kind of the structure for how we want to do it going forward. So we'll have the release notes on the docs. And then the last thing that is not going to drop next week, but will just magically show up in a couple of weeks, is bringing in the core Crossplane CRD API types into the docs. We've got some ways to automatically generate that from source. So we'll take the YAML files that are generated in the cluster folder of the repo and basically turn that into pretty rendered documentation. So we have the tooling, we just got to do the work.
Awesome, Pete. That sounds really good. I know people have been looking for docs on core Crossplane for a while. Our story has been like docs.crd.dev, which is somewhat deprecated, let's just say. So it's really good to have that there and in a single place, and be easily referenceable and such. Pete, do you want to kind of also catch up this group here too about the thinking and the decision around like the full command reference, like not automatically syncing the code, helping the code over to docs?
Yeah, and I know you and I talked about that a bit yesterday. So the first thing is working on. I put in some PRs for the help text within the CLI. I think the first thing is that it's pretty clear that the context in which a user is looking at the help text versus, when I say help text, I mean like, -H, that versus documentation tend to be different, right? I think the -H is you generally are in the neighborhood and you're trying to remember the specific syntax, where the documentation is much more about the what and the how and the why, right? Give me a little bit more color and clarity as to what I'm doing and why I would use that. It's also a better thing when you don't know what you're looking for, right? If I know Crossplane beta render, great. But if I'm just like, how do I preview my function? I don't know what to -H on. So that's kind of number one, is the help in docs, different audiences, different use cases. So that makes it hard. Number two is I love the idea of auto-generating documentation. I get really nervous around doing it for things that are cut releases as opposed to something that's more SaaS or CD based, because now it becomes challenging to keep documentation. Like we find a bug in the docs, or in this case, the docs aren't done. Do we delay the release? Do we now like go and manually update the docs separate from source? Do we create like a dot release just to improve documentation, like within code comments? That gets really hairy. And I think that the value we get from doing a little bit of autogen is probably not worth the challenges of being tied to, a tag of source, because a release is effectively a point in time and a commit. And now you're going to start to differ that as I add more commits. That's different than the release, if that makes sense. I'm open to people who have thoughts or ideas or suggestions there. This is not a religious belief, but it's something that makes me uncomfortable. So as a result, the approach has been just kind of manually walk through it and do it.
Yep, that makes sense, Pete. I don't have any major disagreements with your instincts on that stuff there. And so so for the full command reference here and installations and all that stuff that we want to focus on, is there any particular areas, Pete, where this team here, this SIG, can be contributing to help you out or take some load off your plate or test things or anything that would be useful for you?
I'll have a question that I'll throw out after this around what is that flag that I'm looking at? Providing observed resources with function render. I know I asked about that yesterday, and I cannot for the life of me find the answer that somebody gave me. I think Jared and Philippe gave me answers, but I had another follow-up there. But otherwise, I'm basically done. So the big thing that I would love from the team is just content review. So I'll have all that PR out today, I hope. And yeah, I think that's it. Because the release notes aren't written yet, so that'll be the other thing. But that'll be probably Friday.
Sounds good, Pete. Then so that makes a lot of sense for me. And then I think that this SIG here can definitely like take the time and prioritize getting you feedback for the docs and experience you're building that will help users be successful with what we're building for this release. So definitely feel free to ping us on the SIG DevEx channel, and we'll try to prioritize that for sure.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jared.
Awesome, Pete. Thanks very much. Anybody else have questions about docs or anything that they're curious about there or want to make sure it gets called out? All right. So I wanted to check in with folks about like the key testing scenarios here. So we're at Code Freeze today, so it should be somewhat polished, at least like major bugs are identified and fixed, etc. So we don't have large outstanding bugs in our tracking issue, so that we know we need to do still. But that does not mean we are bug free, right? There can certainly still be bugs lurking out there. So I wanted to kind of check in with folks to see if there are major, like, what are the riskiest scenarios or the scenarios we feel the least confident about that we want to get some testing eyes on sooner than later before we get closer to the release 1 week from today. Piotr, is there anything from you that you've tried a couple scenarios out? Anything that you're feeling like we need more confidence on? Yeah, maybe not. Philippe, how about you?
I mean, the most let's say new commands we introduced in the CLI are the trace one and the render one, which was actually not so new. We brought in most of the code from xrender, but as we noticed, there were some bugs in a few latest changes. So maybe that's for sure something I would like people to have a look at and to try out before we crystallize it in an actual release. And other than that, I don't think so, no.
Is this, Philippe, something that there are definitely automated tests, right, within Crossplane itself? But do we have like a idea for automated end-to-end test with CLI itself, like installing CLI in a container and just grabbing some composition, for example, for render? Have we thought about it?
Yeah, we could. We probably could. We didn't yet. We have given how we write most of the tests, we can actually write unit tests for most of them. We usually inject the file system. We usually inject most of the things. So unit tests can go a long way. But yeah, we should probably investigate end-to-end tests if something is worth it. We could use the same E2E framework we are using for Crossplane to just write some features about the CLI and test it out. We are already building the CLI, so we could use the same thing.
I'm thinking also, since this is a part of software that is being installed on the client PC, we might want to get fancy in future and see if we can simulate a Windows with subsystem for Linux, or actually Linux desktop or Mac, just to be sure that we handle other software, like we have a dependency on dot that is embedded in the render command, but just probably not something for now, but kind of a thought for more robust testing, to kind of test different host machines as well.
Definitely.
As you end up doing that, it would be super useful to me to see how to phrase this. I don't want to see the tests because that's almost too much detail, but you're going to have test suite setup. That sketched out is effectively going to be the requirements for install for the software. That'd be super useful, just to make sure we get that captured in docs. So I'll take that whenever you get around it. I'll take that in whatever form: Notepad, Smoke Signal, Carrier Pigeon.
Carrier Pigeon, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. Why would anything else be suggested? So Piotr, that's a good point. That and it kind of gets into this point here that I've been wondering about a bit. So automated end-to-end tests that actually like invoke the CLI from the top level and go through the entire stack there, like from executing the main entry point, binary type of thing. That's kind of, it goes hand in hand with I haven't looked at this recently, but what I suspect to be the case is that in terms of unit test coverage, probably like the main command entry points that sets up the Kong flags and does some of the like creating a Kubernetes client or whatever, like initialization stuff before we go into the various packages and libraries that do have good unit test coverage. There's probably not good unit test coverage at the command layer, I assume. So that is something that automated end-to-end tests that invoke, the main entry point of the binary would be covering, that we probably don't cover in unit tests right now. Philippe, have you looked at in a recent PR, let's say, have you looked at like a code coverage report to see where we got some gaps?
We definitely have gaps in all the run functions for all the comments. Those are mostly not tested. We could write unit tests, but then Kong is actually doing a lot of parsing and validating, and the framework we're using for the CLI part is doing a lot. So probably an end-to-end test would still be useful. Like I pass this flag, is it actually okay, and is it actually working? So we definitely could find some usage for the end-to-end tests.
And how about the command line distribution? Do we only distribute it as a kubectl plugin or a standalone installation? Maybe this is something we could also look at, whether it can work in a container, and maybe through Scoop or Chocolate or whatever other installation means. To like app, I think, has a lot of installation possibilities. Have we looked at that?
Actually, I mean, we removed the kubectl plugin part. Is now a standalone CLI. So, I mean, you can always install it in the right folder and make it work as a kubectl plugin, but that's not the way we are envisioning and thinking about it at the moment. I also realized the other day we are not providing, I mean, on Mac, you usually use Brew to install, and app has Brew to install stuff, and we don't have that for Crossplane, so that would be definitely a good addition. And then, yeah, other package managers could be useful too. I have little experience with Chocolate or all the Windows stuff.
I think looking at app, it's actually really fancy. It has homebrew, it has RPM and Debian package manager. It also has Nix. So quite a few, since they already did the heavy lifting, we could just see how it's done and just implement similar if we want to maintain all those channels, of course.
Brew could have the advantage that nowadays Brew is also available on Linux, so we will cover Linux and Mac with a few lines of YAML probably, and that's it. So we could think of that as a first step, and then grow from there wherever.
It would increase the adoption of the command line for sure. Yeah. And we are already building multi-arc binaries, right? So Go, we already, okay, well, that's cool.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something we should consider, so that we have more options for getting this software in the hands of more users. But then I think this group mentioned it, maybe not explicitly, but I think it did kind of get mentioned, but worth reiterating, is that that becomes less of a priority, though, when you have something with the simplicity that we have right now, where you have like a statically compiled Go binary, and it's literally one executable that you need on your machine. You don't have to have like a bunch of dependencies get put into place and all that sort of stuff. It's just a statically compiled binary. That becomes less important. I know there's definitely good experience and optics and the confidence that people have when installing software through their preferred package manager, especially as opposed to like the pipe something from curl to sh. That's sketchy for sure, no doubt about that. So there's definitely improvements there, but the simplicity of the binary that we have does make the maintenance burden of multiple package managers and formats and stuff like that a little bit less important. That's all.
Right, that makes perfect sense. And the last thing I mentioned, just from the experience, things like auto completion scripts for usual shells would be something very helpful. It's not that difficult to do for Z shell, for example.
And I think we have that in 1.15, Piotr, to do like
cool.
install completions or something like that, which would be very cool. I don't know how it works though.
I'm already in the future.
Cobra automatically generates the configuration for that. I think Kong does the same, and then maybe you have to hook up if you want to get the experience of kubectl get, and you tab and you get the resources, and you tab and you get the names. That's more work, but other than that, the simple auto completion should not be too hard to have.
Cool.
All right, sweet. So we can definitely open a tracking issue for this to make sure that we we consider this for upcoming milestones as well. Did we? Okay, yeah. So I think the install completion stuff is covered as well. So then I guess let's get back. Make sure we're done with talking about testing scenarios though. Still too. Yeah, I think that in general, the more real world usage, or like people try, like for instance, trace or render for people's composition functions they're writing, the more scenarios that we get people to try out, the more likely we'll be able to find edge cases that we are not supporting yet. Because I do still have a sneaking suspicion that the amount of testing coverage for real world scenarios that we have for all this new code is still fairly low. I think that it probably won't be long after we release 1.14 and we get real more adopters actually trying it out, they will find bugs for scenarios that we didn't see yet when our limited testing. So anything like that, any scenarios that we could do ahead of time will definitely be useful. Jonas, did you get a chance? So all the trace code that you had written, and then we continued to add some more investments in it and get it merged in. Have you been able to take the trace command for a test spin with your environment and your test scenarios, dude?
Yeah, I tested it locally, but to be honest, like my test setup isn't that complex. I just use like nested compositions. But what I saw from a comment from Hassan, I guess, he tried already like a more complex setup with multiple nested compositions for a cluster. But yeah, what I will do is like once it's released, I will announce it also in my company, like the Crossplane support group, whatever, and then they will also test it out, and I will give feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's definitely really useful. Is that well, first, Jonas, that the scenarios you had in mind when you were writing the original code there, like those still work is pretty important. You know, that we didn't regress anything that you thought was important when you're originally building the code, man. And then the other thing is that yeah, the more usage we get of from real world scenarios and adopters is all the better. So that would certainly be appreciated, and your contribution to that would be helpful for sure. And then yeah, and Jonas, we could also talk too about more features that you might want to add, like more investments that you want to keep making in Trace to add more useful things. Those are more than welcome to, and any time that you want to spend on continuing to advance that functionality is definitely welcome.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to that.
Awesome, dude. Cool. Yeah, and once again, too bad you were not able to make it to Chicago this year, but we'll try to catch up in Paris though in person.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, just wanted to call out then here. So this is the command we've had for a while for installing the latest builds or master. So even though we haven't officially hit code freeze yet and done the release branch and all that jazz, you could still use the latest stuff right now with like what's in master. Then something I kind of thought of that was a bit interesting here today is that Hassan has a proposal out about doing release candidate RC builds. So to get builds of Crossplane functionality into the hands of users and have a story around installing it and actually getting some test mileage on it. Hassan has a proposal for that I believe he's planning on doing as part of the 1.14 release process. One thing that's kind of interesting about that, though, is that in that proposal, I think that means I think that means that folks that are when we do a release candidate build and promote it and push it and all that jazz, I believe that just installing the normal path to install the CLI will start installing the release builds as well. But because I think we're pushing to the stable channel essentially in that proposal. So I think that's the case, and it's a little weird, but I don't think it's a major concern yet. That's not like something I think that's going to totally break the world. And it also probably speaks to, hey, that we should be getting the CLI its own release vehicle, its own repository, its own cadence sooner than later. Cool. All right. So Philippe, do you want to kind of set the stage here? Because I don't have context myself. I just kind of saw like a high level thing, but I don't have context. Is there anything you want to share on your screen or anything?
Yeah. Let me share my screen.
Okay, let me stop here. Okay, your turn.
So this is the issue with the proposed solution, let's say. So the point is we promoted schema-aware validation for compositions in 1.14 to beta, so it's now enabled by default. Obviously, we are in time for doing some breaking changes, going from alpha to beta, so we were discussing a few users installed the master version of Crossplane and found a few bugs. I mean, one bug this morning, but that kind of suggested us what we already felt, that alpha features are actually, if they're not so let's say fancy features like functions or stuff which creates more noise, they're actually not tested out so much by users, and so we felt we could probably tune it a little bit down and default to only emitting warnings instead of just breaking and stopping compositions from being deployed altogether due to some minor bug we should be fixing. So the discussion was around should we rename, should we default to emitting only warnings in case of issues with the schema. So a composition, for example, having a patch, like for example, I think we can have a look. Yeah, for example, this one, you can see here there is a patch which is actually accessing with a 2 composite field path, is accessing a field from a string to this one is accessing the from field path is a string and the target is an integer. There is no transformation. So if we have both schemas of the source and destination of a patch, we are able to match the two and say, this is wrong. You are going to get an error because the types of the target, the source and the destination don't match. And so you have an error. Obviously, if there is any bug in the implementation of this check, if it could result in some errors that are actually not actually errors, and so it would push probably people to just disable it and not use it, and we will lose the valuable feedback from the users. So the proposal was to switch to have a mode called warning mode, and so you could just say, for example, if you let me zoom it a little bit. Well, that's an awful sharing, but yeah, for example, in this case, I was applying an invalid composition without any annotation, and it was just accepting it, but showing a warning. You can still go back to the previous default behavior by setting it to either loose or strict, which have different behaviors based on the availability of the CRDs or not. But yeah, that's and then we started discussing whether it's the name was here. There is the whole logic of the checks right now, and why to me strict, loose, and warn makes sense, because I see it as a kind of increasingly reducing the number of compositions that should result in an error. So warn means only compositions not valid per se should be marked as error, but then I could get some warnings. Loose means if I don't have the CRDs, so the schema for some of the resources, that's fine. I'll just return a warning, and that's it, and it's not an error. And then strict means if I don't have all the CRDs, if there is any error or any schema related error, it's just an error, that's it. So to me it makes sense as a naming. Maybe the thing that was confusing was that the annotation was called previously composition validation mode, while it's actually composition. It's actually more specific to schema-aware validation. And so renaming it to composition schema-aware validation mode felt more on point. So right now we are kind of agreeing on that, but feel free to drop in your feedback, or if you have any feedback, feel free to share it.
And Philippe, remind me again real quick, or just like a one or two sentence explanation. What was the major concern about having it turned on by default and rejecting strict mode? Like, what's will that break people's current workflows in production clusters? Is that the main thing?
Yeah, I mean, either if you're applying directly a composition and you get an error, it's kind of easy to see. But then what do? You disable. You only have to disable. The only thing you can do is disabling the whole functionality. It's actually stopping. It's rejecting your composition if we get a false positive. False positives are super risky in this case, because we are actually rejecting compositions which are actually valid, but we try to be safe and to avoid false positives as much as possible. but still it can happen. So I think it's fair to say, let's keep it in warning for the beta and maybe switch it to loose or strict down the road when we promote to GA. Actually, probably the default will be loose, not strict, because otherwise you end up having errors even if you are deploying an XRD together with a composition. It shouldn't be the default behavior to just reject the composition because you don't find a CRD used in the composition. So we could, but that would be probably too aggressive. It should be something the user asks for. So I'd say the default in GA should be loose if we decide to promote it to GA sooner rather than later. And then for now, it's fine warning to collect some more feedback and avoid having people just disabling it because it's not, they hit one bug and they just disabled it and they are not providing any more feedback there.
Interesting.
So like from usability point of view, when I develop compositions, the first part would be authoring. So if this works as part of LSP, that would be great. And I would kind of expect similar behavior where I can either disable it completely or add a comment on a specific chunk of YAML to disable, the error or warning there. And when I use it as a runtime validation mechanism, like it's currently in current form, if the composition would produce errors, just wouldn't work, right? It would like kind of crash, right? I would like to have a way of stating it. So saying, don't allow my compositions if you think they will crash, but in the same time, having this ability to circumvent it by adding, maybe annotation on a specific resource or more granularly could be helpful, because the value for me from like as a composition author and an operator would be really like, it's almost like validation webhook in Kubernetes. Like it just rejects it. If this is wrong, it doesn't correspond to your policies, or in this case schema is incorrect, I have this safety net. And with warnings, I am worried that I will lose this feeling of safety net, because once I start glossing over warnings, like saying, okay, one warning is fine, second, whatever, then I'm just being, I'm not really getting a signal that this is really something very bad potentially. So I understand that you're worried about false positives because it's different than in, building a binary, because you cannot build it. You have a, exception. In this case, you have to put it to the cluster first.
Yeah.
So it's a very valid concern. But, like from the user point of view, I would say, I would love to have this feeling of safety net and maybe more granular way of switching these errors on and off. If I know that, okay, I'm okay with that. I understand that this might be an error, but I explicitly want to allow it. So I'm not sure if we are able to manipulate errors on such a granular level.
Probably not. I mean, it's we don't have visibility on the comments in the YAML. We just get the resource from Kubernetes as a validation request. So it's not something we can do at this level. It will be nice, but it would probably require changing some. I mean, adding some field to the composition patches and saying, yeah, this one should be allowed to be invalid or not, but that will be not the best either. So that's hard. So just to clarify, the logical validation is always enforced. So what you were saying about if you certainly know that this thing is invalid, we are always going to return an error. That's why I was suggesting making the annotation more specific, because it's calling it warning felt like saying composition validation mode warn felt like okay, if I create a pipeline, a composition with mod pipeline specifying resources, it's just going to return a warning. No, that's not the case. We are returning errors in that case because it's logical validation. This is only about what do you do with the schemas and the errors you can catch using the schemas.
Gotcha. All right, sorry guys, I gotta drop to another call, but thank you for explaining, Philip. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Piotr. Yeah, so yeah, we're out of time here, and I got a hard stop as well. So yeah, I want to think about this a little bit and maybe add a comment as well, Philippe. But yeah, that was something I did not get actually until you just said it now, is that this is for a subset of our validation, right? It is not for the logical validation. So if that needs to be made more clear in the PR or in the naming of it or something, then that does sound like a good idea, because I did not get that myself.
I think there is some. I have to check the docs, because I think the docs are kind of misleading in that sense. So maybe some part of the confusion came apart from the annotation being too generic, probably because in the beginning we thought it should be more generic, and then the documentation kind of helped on it. So yeah, I'll double check.
Cool. Sounds good. All right, sweet. So we're out of time here. But thanks for everybody coming today. And then, next time we meet, we'll be talking much more seriously about 1.15 and upcoming roadmap stuff, and getting people chances to get involved on those big ticket items and delivering stuff for the next milestone. So good to see everybody today. Thanks for participating.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.